Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 2 of the Liberation Sessions, a fresh take on mental health, healing, and justice. This is a place where you all know we explore the intersections of mental health, justice, joy, and genuine connection. I'm your host, Causha Spellman-Timmons, and today's episode is really special for me. We're going to be diving deep into a topic that we don't often talk a lot about, and that is workplace trauma. And along with that, we're going to talk about some healing. We'll be unpacking some often ignored realities and difficulties of how broader sociopolitical violence as well can seep into our workplaces, relationships, and our sense of self. So I want to make sure that in light of the sensitive topics that we'll be talking about today, make sure that you please do take care of yourself. Do whatever you have to do to make sure that you are feeling all right. And you can always pause us and come back. But please do take care of yourself. And we'll, as always, leave you with resources so that if you feel like you might want to reach out for help, assistance, someone to talk to, you'll be able to do that. All right, so today I am so honored to be joined by someone that I am also grateful to be able to call friend. And that is our special guest, Dr. Heliana Ramirez, who is also a researcher, a therapist, and a coach who helps BIPOC and LGBTQ plus employees defend against workplace abuse. Dr. Ramirez uses neuroscience, employment anti-discrimination law, and somatic practice to address racial battle fatigue, which we'll talk more about, and race-based traumatic stress. Considering intergenerational racialized labor trauma, inauthentic allyship in white-collar workplaces, and the weathering effect of daily stress in predominantly white education systems, workplaces, healthcare, and the law, Dr. Ramirez works with clients to inventory injuries to their physical, mental, and spiritual health. Clients are supported to create personalized workplace trauma recovery plans that build on their own nervous system regulation, cultural practices, personal value systems, and professional goals. So, thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Ramirez. Why don't you tell us some more about yourself, or just tell us a little bit about who you are outside of those titles?
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here. I mean, I think the first thing that I'd like to share is that I'm a big fan of your work. I am a big fan of the way that you create community, your attention to uh, cooperatives and speaking truth, no matter what the powers might be doing around you. We need more people like you. So, really, truly, thank
Mm,
you for this podcast. Thank you for the work that you do in community. And what can I tell you? I am a person who is a lover of justice and who will not be quiet, whether the abuse is happening in the home, in the workplace, or in our nation's government. For too long, our people have been sidelined, injured, and then gaslit for the injuries that we have. And in 2025, the stakes are extremely high, and immigrants and Latinos and LGBTQ folks, and especially trans folk, the people who are most marginalized in our society, are the first to be hit by what's happening. But they're coming for all of us, and none of us should feel safe at this moment.
absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think not I think for sure one of the reasons that we have built such a connection is because we do share a bond in the belief that we cannot be quiet. And I recognize that for to a lot of people that may seem like a privilege. And so I think it's also, and I think that it is a privilege to an extent. And I think that we both believe that that should not be a privilege, that that is something that should it be in existence as a basic right of being alive and being human. And I just want to say that I appreciate the ways in which you also continue to hold society and to hold individuals and systems and workplaces accountable. So, thank you for the work that you do. I'm really excited to jump into this conversation with you today. So, the first question to ground us in our conversation today that I have to ask is, would you share a little bit about your journey and how you came to the work of mental health and justice? And was there a particular or a specific moment that on your journey that resonates with you, or moments?
Thank you. Uh, I am the granddaughter of Helen Ramirez and Fidelis McMullen. And as their granddaughter, I was raised to think always about people who are most targeted um, by systems of oppression, especially those systems that want us to believe that they're here to help us.
Mm,
Sometimes education systems, healthcare systems, certainly the law, they talk about they're here to improve our health or to give us education. But frankly, if we call out the systemic injustice in those systems, we are very quickly targeted.
mm,
So I would start by acknowledging my ancestors, and both of these women did that in all parts of their lives. I was raised by a gay Mexican American father.
mm,
And in the 1980s, late 80s, I went to the hospital to visit some of his friends who were dying of AIDS related illnesses. And
mm,
I came out as queer in high school and then in college more so, and knew that I wanted to go into mental health as a profession, and I wanted to
mm,
find a profession that was actually dealing with social justice. Psychology at that time did not. It was the National Association of Social Workers that had very clearly in the bylaws a focus on social justice. So I went the route of social work, and I worked in Veterans Affairs for 13 years,
mm.
specifically addressing issues that were impacting LGBT plus veterans.
Yeah.
But I've also worked in harm reduction at the National Coalition of Harm Reduction in New York City and did needle exchange work. So my work has really focused on like HIV, Hep C prevention, overdose prevention, a lot of work with people who are unhoused, and always my heart is with our BIPOC community, so Black, Indigenous, and other people of color and LGBTQ folks. I live in that intersection, and the intersection is where I find the most um, strength and resistance, and also
Mhm.
wisdom in moments like this when it feels like everything is crashing around us. You know what? Some of our people have known how to survive this stuff, and we are here because of our ancestral wisdom.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's so powerful. And another point of commonality, because as you spoke, I was thinking like this is similar to when people ask me and I'm like, I don't remember not. I don't remember not having the lens that I have. I mean, obviously, as I've gotten older and more mature and connected more with, ancestral wisdom, I think I've gotten even more radical, as some would say. I don't think that's radical, but it's radical by today's standards. Um, but I would say, obviously, I've gotten more and more, but I don't remember there ever being a time where I thought that injustice was okay. And I know that we don't think about it like that, but that's as simple as it is to me. Either injustice is okay or it's not. I don't negotiate who it's okay for, who it's not okay, you know what I mean? And I never had that in my mind, so I don't really conceptualize how that exists in our society. But I think having an understanding that that is how a lot of folks, they have to come to it, allows you to have compassion for those who may be coming to the idea later. But I appreciate you sharing that. Um, and so, furthermore, I want to know now before I jump into like the boring stats to get your thoughts on some of those things. Uh, that through your journey in mental health, could you talk a little bit about how you landed in the realm of where you are now, workplace trauma and healing, and you know, feel free not to, you know, share any specifics. Just how did you find yourself now, you know, in this part of mental health?
Yeah, so great question. Thank you for the invitation. So I was working at Veterans Affairs for a really long time. For folks who are not familiar, it is the largest healthcare system in the nation. And
Mm,
when I was working there, it was before repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was the policy that Clinton put into place so that LGBT, well, specifically lesbian, gay, bisexual veteran service members could serve in the U.S. military. No one's supposed to ask, no one's supposed to tell. But of course, we know if we're in the queer community, that's not how it goes, right?
right.
You're heading into the holidays and you're standing there around the proverbial water cooler and people start talking. Who are you going to be
Mhm.
with if you celebrate, and this kind of stuff? And for those of us who are queer, suddenly we're in a place to have to figure out, do I disclose who I am and who my partner or partners are? Do I change the pronouns so that I can hide, right? And for military, prior to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it was very dangerous. If people were
Yeah.
identified as lesbian, gay, or bisexual, they would be pushed out of the military and they'd lose all rights to all of the benefits. But it was worse. People were attacked by the people that they worked next to. There were blanket parties at night when people would be beaten and killed at times from
Mm,
within the US military itself. And so when I was working at Veterans Affairs, I was working with LGBT veterans, started up a veterans support group, and became an LGBT veteran care coordinator, and started to do research into the experiences of trauma in the US military for LGBT service members. And then I entered a doctoral program because I was in too many meetings. Frankly, Cache, I'm going to tell you honestly, I was in too many meetings where I'm advocating for veterans like I'm supposed to, according to our code of ethics, and not being taken seriously because I didn't have that doctorate. I didn't have an MD. And so I was
uh,
like, well, heck no, I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to get this.
mhm, mhm,
And so I did. And my dissertation was specifically looking at trauma and recovery among LGBT service members and veterans from their own words. Because part of the problem that I see is that when we get researchers who are not part of the community going in and doing research and they are not aware of their own privileges, frankly, advantages, I learned that from Dr.
mm.
Resma Menikin, then we end up with data that's skewed, that's funky,
Yes.
that is stigmatizing, right? So that's
Mhm,
why my research is really always about putting the microphone, putting the camera, putting the, investigative lens in the hands of the people who we're talking about in the first place. So I had the great opportunity of working with Dr. Michael Nettleman, who at that point was at Stanford,
okay.
and Andrew V. Lee, who was a doctoral
Uh-huh.
student in music. And we did a film that was called The Camouflage Closet with LGBT veterans talking about their
Mm,
experiences of trauma and recovery. And that's kind of how I got into work. So I was early on looking at issues of workplace abuse and discrimination. And
okay.
like many queer folk and like many people of color, I had multiple experiences of workplace abuse as well over the years.
Mm,
People
mhm.
didn't really like it that I was doing LGBT stuff at the VA. And so one day I
Yeah.
went to my car and my windshield was broken and some of my posters would be taken down and people write anti-gay expletives on them and that kind of stuff. But frankly, because I am femme, because I run around with lipstick and, all of the different things, I know that I was safer than had I been butch
Mhm,
or had I been gender, diverse in any number of ways. I
mhm.
probably would not have been as protected as I was to do that work. But the workplace stuff, workplace abuse continues. Any of your listeners, I'm sure you've probably experienced this too. People don't actually like it when you point out the systemic racism or the systemic homophobia or transphobia in
Yeah.
a workplace, even if that work is supposed to help people. And so they'll come after you. And that's what happened in one of my workplaces. I was mobbed out of a job. And at that point, I
Mm,
thought, oh, heck no. Heck no, because what happens is that we see too often the research from places like Workplace Bullying Institute. Oftentimes, it is the most ethical, competent people who have the greatest subject matter expertise, who are not trying to get involved in office place politics, who end up being targeted by who? Imposter leaders, people who are
mm,
promoted into positions without the necessary subject matter expertise or even the training and management. And those people
Wow.
find the others, yeah. And so then they target the person that they feel like is potentially going to get, replace them. So it happens all the time. For any of your listeners who might have been targeted by workplace bullying or abuse, the good news is you're part of an amazing group of people who were targeted because they are amazing.
Mhm.
And so that's why I started Workplace Trauma Recovery LLC.
Love this, and I want you to tell us more, even more about this. Like before I even get into some other stuff, because this is fascinating to me in the sense that I know one of the things when you and I started talking about this is I recognize how much we don't recognize workplace abuse or workplace trauma even as we are experiencing it. Like I remember in one of our conversations, I was like, "Oh my God, I never even thought about it in that." Like I never would have used that terminology for what I was experiencing. And I think so many, especially BIPOC and other marginalized folk, are so used to just putting up with, right? In the workplace, be it women, when it comes to gender discrimination, sexual harassment, those types of things. We've always heard, like, well, back in my day, it was part of the work culture. That's what it was. It was actually part of work culture, and to try and so the thought was you're shifting work culture if you shift workplace trauma. Is that what we're saying here, or what is this idea somehow that workplace abuse and trauma is part of workplace culture? And could you speak a little bit to folks who may not be identifying with what we know now is as workplace trauma or abuse?
Yeah, great point. Great questions. Okay, so first I'd like to make a distinction between stress and trauma. So there's good stress that happens, all the time. Like if we go into a job interview, right? The brain releases stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and that helps us to be a little bit more alert and to,
Mhm.
really shine, hopefully, in an interview. Our bodies are not made to have to tolerate constant stress. And when that stress is continuous in a workplace where you are constantly undermined, you are demeaned, you are sabotaged. They keep you from appointments or meetings, they withhold information or resources from you.
Mm,
Somebody is slandering your name, right? When there is that kind of psychological aggression and it's constant, that
mhm,
means that the body is constantly being flooded by stress hormones. And over
mm,
time, that actually changes our brain structure. It makes the brain work differently. And we see it on MRIs, magnetic resonance imaging scans. You can literally
mhm,
see how the brain starts to shrink in some key areas that impact things like our ability to think critically, our sense of time, our ability to problem solve.
right.
And so when we talk about workplace trauma, it means that there was either too much, too fast, or too soon. So our regular
Okay.
coping skills were overwhelmed, or there was too little for too long. So let's say that you're at work and you've got a colleague who is just a nasty person and they are cruel and critical
Mhm.
every day. So on Sunday nights, you're starting to have panic attacks. You get to work in the
Ah,
morning, let's say you drive to work and you're crying in the car and you're having to fix your face before you can even walk through the door. Or you're finding yourself in the bathroom in between meetings and crying. These are indicators that the body and the brain are starting to be changed by that chronic stress. When you are working so much that even in your evenings and weekend hours off, you're having to replay that nasty meeting to figure out what just happened, or you're feeling disoriented and confused by you're giving your everything and you're seeing the outpouring of your work. You're doing great. Your clients love you, all these different things, but still you're not being promoted. And I know, for example, the community that I see this the most commonly with are Black women. Black women across industries, across job types are being faced with misogynoir and not being
mhm,
promoted, not being hired, are the first to be fired when there are layoffs and so on. So
mm,
when we say workplace trauma, it means that the body and the mind have started to be changed because of that chronic stress. And we see it on we can actually see it in our bodies. So we have this concept of weathering, And stop me at any point if I need to be paused here.
No,
Is it
no,
okay?
please. Yeah,
Okay.
no, this is good.
Okay, okay. So because I get a little nerdy about this and keep on going. There's an amazing book called Weathering by Dr. Arlene Geronimus, who is a public health professional, and she has done work that shows that, especially among communities of color,
Mhm.
what happens is that over time, with that chronic stress hormone flooding, we end up with shorter lifespans and we end up with earlier onset chronic illnesses like diabetes, heart disease, cancer, obesity that shorten our lives. Those are related to that stress hormone flooding, which causes inflammation in the
Okay.
body. It causes metabolic syndrome. And in fact, there's one study that found, are you ready for this? Black graduates. All right, here we go in the stats. Black graduates of predominantly white institutions have
Mhm.
35% more metabolic illness than did Black graduates of historically Black colleges and universities. Cache, this is after
Mm.
they controlled for diet, they controlled for exercise, right? You know what the factor was that was
Wow.
different? It was exposure to white folks, and it was exposure to institutions that expect everybody to act in a white way.
Yes. Yes. I mean, look, we're gonna be getting into the real.
We have
So
to.
yeah, I appreciate this. I appreciate this, and thank you. We're gonna get more into this. I want to jump into some stats first, just so that folks have an idea of what we're dealing with from a statistical standpoint. It won't be too much, folks. Don't worry. But I did find some things. I'm also a research nerd, so I like to know what are we up against. So I found that 76% of United States workers have reported at least one symptom of a mental health condition in the last year. A quarter, that's 1 in 4 roughly employees, say that their workplaces are the biggest cause of their mental health challenges. That's a quarter, and I'm guessing that it's probably more, but that's what reported. And then only 59% of employees felt that their employers support their own mental health being. And specifically, when you control for BIPOC employees, that number dropped significantly to below 50%. Um, I do want to bring in also some stats that are specifically for marginalized communities. So for Latina, Black, and Indigenous workers, they are more likely to report feeling emotionally unsafe at work, which speaks to what you were referring to, especially during increased periods of political or social situations and crises. Um, LGBTQ plus employees are twice as likely to experience workplace trauma or harassment than their cisgender and heterosexual peers. And I'll just say that Black employees also reported an increased burnout, depression, and anxiety with feeling little organizational support. So, what do you make of these statistics? Um, and what is the mental health toll of pretending that these issues aren't what they are?
Hmm. Yeah. So I think part of the challenge for many of us is that we were raised in families where we are descendants of people who survived shadow slavery, survived colonization, survived the most extreme brutality related to the labor,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
so our families, and again, I want to credit Dr. Resma Menakem, who wrote My Grandmother's Hands, because I learned this from his work. Trauma decontextualized in a person looks like personality. Trauma decontextualized in a
Mm,
family looks like um, family relations, and trauma decontextualized in a community looks like culture. And that's not a perfect quotation, excuse me, Dr. Resma Menakem, but it's
that's
something like
yes.
that. So what happens? So what happens is that in my family, for example, my grandfather Lupe Ramirez was an undocumented immigrant, and he worked in the fields for his entire life
Mhm.
in California. And when he would go to work in the morning, 4 a.m., he'd leave. They didn't know if he would come back that night or if he was going to get picked up by ICE, by migra, by immigration, and then deported. And that happened several times. And sometimes he'd come back quickly. Sometimes it would take a year or more for him to come back. What happened was, in addition to that being state sanctioned mobbing, which is what we're seeing right now with ICE,
Right.
it also meant that he was experiencing such an impressive workplace with so few rights as a worker to defend himself. He would come home on Fridays and he would get the 6 kids together and he would say, and I want you to go to school and work hard so you don't have to work like a burro like me, like a donkey like me.
Mm,
So what that message was that if you could get an education and you could get out of the fields and into an office of any kind, it's going to be better for you. And
mhm.
so when we finally get those degrees, when we finally get into the office, it seems like we've made it. And so we
Yeah.
end up putting up with tolerating such indignities. And
Mm,
as I was just explaining, it kills us. It literally kills us. So when I was going through my worst workplace abuse, I kept thinking, Kasia, I kept thinking, you know what? I'm going to wait till I get a better job. I'm not going to let
right.
them run me out of here. And I didn't realize how sick it was making me. I was pregnant
Yeah.
at the time. And my baby ended up being injured as well by that stress hormone flooding. But I kept
Mm,
thinking, well, I'm not being exposed to the toxins like my grandpa was in the pesticides in the fields,
mhm.
not understanding that the damage and the injury from that kind of chronic stress in the workplace can cause just as much health problems that can make it hard for us to work in the future as well. So I think
Yeah.
when you ask about like what is the cost of that, that's part of it. I have
Mhm.
seen a number of brilliant Black women writing about the cost of masking at work, the cost of having to
Mm,
show up and be so carefully controlled with facial expressions, with tone of voice, so that they don't end up having that disgusting racist trope of the angry Black woman come out. And
yeah.
so and we know from LGBT people as well. Research shows us that when we have to hide who we are, we have to hide who our partner is or, our relationships and this kind of stuff, it erodes our wellness. It erodes because it takes all of this extra energy to constantly be
Mhm.
making sure that we don't let the pronoun slip, that we don't mistakenly out ourselves, right?
Mhm.
That's psychological energy that's kept from our work, right?
Yeah.
That we're not able to do the actual product of our work because so much energy is frankly having to protect ourselves in the workplace. So those are a couple of examples.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And that I'm thinking also of this week I was at an educational summit, and one and not just one, it was a few of the Black male educators who expressed like what would it one of the questions were what would it be to be in a educational environment as an educator where your well-being was considered, something like that. And a common theme amongst Black male educators was that it would be a space where they would not have to code switch. They would not have to change the way that
Mm,
they
mm,
talked or the way that they walked or the way that they approached people or make themselves smaller because they're seen as overbearing or all of these different things. And so, exactly what you're referring to, just the way in which you have to forget about the way the world is policing you, the ways in which you have to police yourself to feel quote unquote safe sometimes. And I think that this is another thing that I was just not born with. I think people have worried about me all my life because I don't have like I could make people comfortable in spaces, but that what that forces me to do to myself is so detrimental, that it is something that has just never been I've never been able to fully do. And you spoke about your grandfather, and I just want to say thank you so much for speaking his name into this space. My grandmother, who is still alive, she's 83 years old and calls me all day. Shout out to Grams. She worked in the fields in the rural South, still born in the 40s, and talked to me all my life about her life of having to get up and go work in the fields before school and then come home and work in the fields after school and how much of a privilege it was for her just to even be able to graduate high school. And so, yes, I've gone my whole life thinking, who am I to complain about, having my feelings hurt, essentially, is what I've called it. And I think a lot of us do until you wake up and realize one day, yeah, no, this isn't okay no matter where I work or what I'm doing. So yeah.
With that point that you just raised, it also reminds me of this really powerful research. Dr. Scott, I'm forgetting her first name, but what she does, she has a power and control wheel where she shows that the exact same tactics that are used by workplace abusers are the same tactics that are used by domestic violence abusers. They map on to each other directly. Most of us are
Yeah.
working at least 40 hours a week. If we are working 40 hours a week, that is more time than we are spending with an abuser at work than we would spend with an abuser at home. So
Mm.
just in terms of like, everybody, well, mostly in 2025, people recognize that domestic violence, interpersonal, intimate partner violence is wrong. And we've got laws against it. We just don't have a law around workplace abuse in this country unless you're being targeted for a quote unquote protected class.
Right.
If your workplace abuser is sloppy enough to be saying racist things while they're being abusive or
Mhm.
homophobic things or what have you, then there's a law, depending on where you're located and what kind of work you're doing,
Mhm.
that you could rely upon for some protection. But if
Mhm.
they are smart abusers, and here's the disgusting thing, and I'm warning to everybody out there, right? Like, get yourself,
Right.
prepare yourself for this. The worst and most dangerous domestic violence people are the people who hit where you would not see the bruises. And the
Mm.
same is true for workplace abusers too. They know how to
Mhm.
hide their abuse. They know how to bury uh the evidence. And so
Mhm. Mhm.
that's part of why it is so damaging to us, because it's not just the number of hours that we're actually exposed to these people, but the
Mhm.
worst ones possible will destroy your reputation in the process. And then it will impact potentially the ability to get work in the future.
Yes. Yes. This is so true. So true. Okay. I wanna take us into a topic that you already started with the story of your grandpa. Um, because I think that it's important when we talk about workplace trauma to recognize that it's not just a workplace thing, right? This becomes a community level trauma and experience. So I just want to just a couple of more quick stats, and then I'll ask a question. But after local ICE raids or immigration enforcement events, communities showed spikes in anxiety, depression, school absenteeism, and job instability. Now, this is a stat from 2020, but I imagine that we have similar things happening here. And then secondary trauma is witnessing or fearing harm to your community that can lead to PTSD like symptoms, especially in collectivist cultures and tight knit communities, which many marginalized communities come from and live in. And even when we talk about LGBTQ plus community with their chosen families and communities. So, what are some emotional and psychological? You've already started on this, so if you want to just add to what you've already stated, what are the emotional and psychological impacts of ICE raids potentially on individuals, the families, the coworkers, and then the communities at large?
Mhm. Yeah, so there's terror right now. There is terror. People are not going to school. Kids are not going to school because they're scared of getting picked up. They're scared their parents will get picked up. People are not going to hospitals when they're in medical crisis, again, because they're scared that ICE will pick them up. People are not going to work. When crimes are happening, people are victimized, they're not even calling police or trying to get any help from the state because they're
Mm,
scared that they're going to get picked up at the same time. So we have people who are hiding at home, who are not getting medical care who need it, who are losing out in education. We've got the terror of the intergenerational piece, I think. So moving out a little bit more to the family now, For those of us who have had this happen generation after generation, and my
Mhm.
grandfather was picked up during what was called the so-called Operation Wetback. So in World War II, a large number of men in the US went to war, and that left
Right.
a whole bunch of jobs that were not getting done. So the US went into Mexico and recruited all of these Mexican men to come here to fill behind those vacant jobs. And
Mhm.
then when World War II ended and those people who survived the war came home, then they did Operation Wetback, which was to push all of those Mexican workers out of the nation. And so that's when they started doing these huge sweeps where
Yeah.
the law enforcement themselves would go door to door, bust into people's homes, rip people out of bed, and deport them. And even US immigrants, or excuse me, US citizens would be picked up
Mhm.
because, again, back to the sloppy bigotry of the United States racism, they can't tell the difference between brown and they don't take a time to actually look at
Right.
documentation. And so
Right.
people would get picked up and then just dropped in Mexico. I mean, that's better than El Salvador, but be there and not be able to get back. And so the
Right.
financial loss. So in many of our communities, what we know now from epigenetics is that massive traumas change our genetic structure. It gets passed down through our DNA. And so right now, the terror that we are feeling in Latina communities and other immigrant communities right now, much of that isn't just our terror from what's happening right now, but it's an
Right.
ancestral trauma that was
Yes.
communicated through our genes as well as our culture.
Mhm.
So I would say that, and in terms of the family piece, in terms of the community piece, I mean, Cache, yesterday I watched a video of a man down in Santa Ana, California, who was doing landscaping at an IHOP restaurant. And people who told us that they're ICE, they show up in an unmarked vehicle, they are masked. These people, let's be real, these people could be anybody. We don't
Any
know who
and
these people
sometimes
are.
they have
They
been, right.
maced, that's right, that's right.
Mhm.
And so they maced this man, they got him on the ground, and they beat the living daylights out of him.
Oh
That
god.
should not happen to anyone. That should not happen to anyone. But you know what? This man has 3 sons, and they are Marines. They are U.S. Marines. So
All
his
right.
sons are watching this video, and they're being interviewed, and they're saying, "Tell us about in the U.S. military, what are the rules of engagement?" In the US military, if you are in a foreign country, you
Mhm.
cannot assault anybody unless they are assaulting you first. And it has
Right.
to be a very serious assault.
Mhm.
Never would you be allowed to do what these supposed ICE officers did.
Mhm.
So these are extrajudicial people who are running around with machine guns who do
Mhm.
not identify themselves. We don't know who they are. So, in the United States, in California, for example, my undergraduate was at UC Santa Cruz, and they had a large number of lynchings of Mexicanos. It was a very common thing that the Klan would round up Mexicanos and do to Mexicanos, and the same thing that was done to Black people in this country. But
Mhm.
because of our education system, most of us are not educated about this.
Right.
So, from a cultural perspective, the terror that happens when we see things like this, when we turn on our phone or on the news at
Mhm.
night, it's like what was happening also around George Floyd's murder. That we knew at the time when we see police assaulting and murdering Black people, it
Mhm.
affects Black people throughout the nation, even if they're not
Right.
in the same town.
Right.
And that's part of the reason why they do the violence like this. It is
Mhm.
on purpose to psychologically terrorize all of us.
Exactly. Exactly. And so I love it because you just spoke to my next question, which was even if someone is not directly targeted themselves, what does it mean to work and or live in fear that your community might be? And you spoke to that so well because I think we're living in a time even more so than in 2016. It feels like we're living a little bit more in a time where people are recognizing that anything can happen to anyone. Um, and the collective trauma from that recognition is, I would say, overwhelming at best for the vast majority of people right now. Um, what responsibility do workplaces have and institutions have in moments that like now?
Well, I'm going to start off because we're in a capitalist culture. I'm going to start off with the basics of an employer is trying to make money in a business. So just based off of the financial outcome of that
Hmm.
business, I think that our workplaces should be creating psychological safety because when workers are having to constantly look over the shoulder and protect against assault or are
Hmm.
coming to work and have just been crying in the parking lot because of the terror that's happening on the streets,
Right.
those workers are not going to be able to perform as well as they possibly could. It is not good business practice to expect that our workers are showing up at work from 9 to 5 and are working in the same way that they always did before because we are living through simultaneous existential crises. Humans are not supposed
Absolutely.
to live through moments like this. So the best thing that an employer can possibly do for themselves as the employer to get the best return on investment for themselves as an employer is to make sure that to the extent that they can, that their workforce has the space to be human, right? Because and what that means is that, if there is a horrifying thing that has just happened in the news, people might need a little bit extra space in the morning. We should not be expecting the same level of output. And what I've
Hmm.
learned from employers and employees is that when employers can come from a trauma-informed perspective,
Hmm.
they will ultimately get better outcomes, better returns from their employees. They will have fewer sick days, they will have less turnover, and they will have greater productivity in the moment. So that's just the business side. As a
Right.
human being, as part of a human community, right? I mean, I think that we should treat people like humans. And
Yeah.
that means that when people tell us that they need to take some sick leave, we support that because it's the law, but it's also the right thing to
Right.
do.
Right.
And I think, I am especially appreciative of those workplaces that are doubling down on their DEI work right now, that are not
Mm.
caving into political pressures.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of businesses that are not only going to retain their employees, but they're going to have better customers as well, who are even more committed. Are you kidding? I would be shopping at Costco every day if I could.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that,
Seriously.
right? Because the way Costco showed up for us.
Uh-huh.
So I think that it really is the best practice for a business in multiple directions to treat their employees right.
Right.
And unfortunately, because of the culture in this country, we say, oh, it's just business as usual. You know what?
Yeah.
When we are being screamed at work, when things are being thrown around, or when people are being undermined from their ability to do their job, that
Mhm.
that's abusive, and we need to call it that. Otherwise,
Right.
we're going to lose our people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. What I'm interested in, you know what? I will save this question for later, actually. I'll save this question for later. Um, I want to shift us just a little bit to to this conversation around we've been using terminology like trauma informed and in mental health we use terminology, of course, like evidence based, and you and I have had these conversations. I am interested in your perspective on any concerns or limitations that you feel exist around trauma-informed care or evidence-based mental health practices
Mm, yeah, that's a great one. Well, I'll
from
quote,
a culturally relevant perspective.
um, I would first reference, I think it's Dr. Sean Ginwright, who first talked about, to my awareness, starting to critically analyze this whole idea of trauma informed. So for folks who are not familiar, so the idea of trauma informed anything, education, business practices, what have you, says instead of asking people what's wrong with you, we ask what happened to you. And we recognize that all nervous systems, all mammalian nervous systems are constantly scanning the environment for safety or danger. And when we have been hurt too much, or we've faced too much danger, or we've had trauma, or what have you, it changes how we interact with the world around us. And
Mhm.
so, if we can do things to help people feel as safe as possible when they're getting their health care or when they're at work, they're going to be able to better engage with that system. They're going to, be quote unquote better patients or better employees or whatever it means. Okay, so what does that actually mean? That means that we do things like we are transparent. We tell people what's about to happen before it happens. Make sure that the person has as much autonomy and ability to make decisions on their own as possible. We avoid stigmatizing people and saying that people are problematic or broken. We don't
Mhm.
pathologize people. Instead, we acknowledge
Right.
that this is a normal reaction to something bad that's happened in the past. We acknowledge the cultural wisdom and resistance. So when we do, that's called trauma informed. Sean Ginwright comes in and says, now, wait a minute. We also need to be looking at how society is traumatizing all of us.
Mhm.
Trauma informed keeps the focus on the individual patient, student, employee, and says, let me see how I can change things just enough so that you can function here. But I'm not actually changing the larger environment or context that's
Uh-huh.
causing you to need to protect yourself like this. So Sean Ginwright comes in and says, look, we need to do trauma informed, but we also need to change the consistent and systemic oppressions that are causing people to have these kind of trauma reactions.
Right.
That's a very limited way of kind of putting it, but it really, I think, makes sense because if, for example, Latine are showing up more frequently in doctor's offices saying, I'm having a hard time sleeping, I'm not eating well, my stomach is always upset, and that doctor says, well, let me give you some antacid, rather than
Mhm.
trying to figure out, are you being inundated by images in the media right now of ICE
Right.
raids, right? It's like it's the same symptom, but they're not looking at it from the quite the right way. And it makes the patient feel like, oh, there's something that I need to change about me, when really it's the larger society that needs to be changed.
Absolutely. Yes. And I just want to say for the listeners or viewers, so Dr. Sean, I always forget if it's getting right or Jen right, which is really a shame because I think I've shared this with you, but I had him as a professor at San Francisco State University, and so it's always embarrassing when I'm like I actually forget how to pronounce his last name. But for those who don't know, his philosophy is the extension that Dr. Ramirez is referring to is called healing centered. And healing centered, yes, basically, I always tell people it kind of picks up where trauma informed leaves off. Like if you're walking through several doors, trauma informed might be the first hallway, and then healing centered. That's kind of how I describe it to like folks, individuals or organizations who are kind of trying to work towards that. Is they feel like trauma informed is the first step. They get that down, then they can go on to other things. So I really appreciate the way in which you you talked about that. Um, I think I do want to dive into this a little bit more. I'm interested in how, speaking of these terminologies, right? Like, how do impossible possible limitations? How do Western mental health frameworks then, in terms that we're talking about, how do they fail or not meet queer and LGBTQ plus, immigrant, indigenous, differently abled communities? Where are the failures there? And what does a more to use our language here at the liberation sessions, what does a more social justice or liberatory approach look like?
Excellent questions. Um, so you had asked a moment ago about these evidence-based practices. EBPs, it's all about EBPs. You can't get through a school of social work. as a master's level student or as a doctoral student or a bachelor's level student without hearing. It's all about evidence-based practices.
Right.
So for folks who are outside of the field, what this means is that somebody or some buddies have tested an intervention over and over and over again with a large enough group of people that they can say with some level of confidence that this intervention is better than nothing. That's pretty much the basic of what we can say. Sometimes they'll do a comparison between interventions and they'll say, well, between this intervention and this intervention, we see better outcomes here. And then that's who gets the funding, right? So
Right.
all of the money ends up going into these evidence-based practices. There are several problems with this. One is if the original research that established it as an evidence-based practice did not include people of color, did not include queer people, did not include people who are living with neurodiversity or what have you,
Mhm.
then really all we can say with confidence is that evidence-based practice worked for white heterosexual middle-class men, for example, because that's who
Mm.
oftentimes is oversampled in those studies. So it's a misnomer to say that the EBP works for everybody when really we should be specific about it.
Okay.
Now, following this down the train of thought, it becomes even more of a problem though when our Latina, queer, trans woman patient does not
Mhm.
have the same outcome from that intervention. Oftentimes, the individual provider and the healthcare system will say, oh, she's not a good patient.
Yes.
She didn't
Uh-huh.
follow directions, right? And so
Non-compliant.
again, we that's exactly right, non-compliant. And so
Uh-huh.
we say that she's the problem rather
Yeah.
than, well, there's no reason to think that this would have even worked for her in the first place.
Right.
That's the most basic level. But what I have seen with very specific interventions is even more dangerous than that. For example, one of the most common two of the most common types of trauma therapies that we have that are evidence-based practices are prolonged exposure therapy and cognitive processing therapy. And these therapies, um, part of what they do is they try to make the brain have less of a reaction to something that reminds them of the original trauma. So, for example, many veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan were exposed to burn pits. And that was a way to get rid of garbage that was in those places. Or so when they come back home to the US, the smell of barbecue, smell of
Mhm.
wildfires, any kind of smoke can send their brains back to Iraq or Afghanistan, and they're suddenly their bodies and their
Uh,
brains are reacting as if they're in a war zone. So
right.
that's what we mean by what's called a trigger or an activation. Okay, fine. So these cognitive processing, blind exposure, the idea is if you expose the person enough times to the memory and or the trigger, the thing that's activating that memory, eventually there will be less reaction to it because the brain will realize, oh, that's just a barbecue. I'm not in Afghanistan.
Okay.
For LGBTQ people, for example, in a homophobic, heterosexist, cisgender society, if that veteran says, I can't go to IKEA, and my wife, my husband, my whomever, my sweeties, they want me to go to IKEA to buy the bed, but I can't go to IKEA because every time I get near IKEA, I feel like I'm back in, this cramped place in Iraq or Afghanistan. If we tell that queer person, well, what you need to do for your homework, essentially, you need to go to IKEA. If that queer person is living in a rabidly homophobic environment, for them walking
Mm.
into IKEA with their same gender partner, it could actually be a
Mhm.
danger for them. They could face violence.
Right.
And if they say, oh, they keep going back to therapy. Well, did you do it? No, I didn't do it. Did you do it? No, I didn't do it. And if that therapist is heterosexual, cisgender, and doesn't stop to ask, well, wait a minute, is there something else? Maybe the person isn't trying to avoid the memory. Maybe they're trying to protect
Huh.
themselves and they have a real reason to do so. So
Right.
it's not just that these evidence-based practices didn't include a diverse sample in the first place. It's also if the providers who are giving the
Mhm.
therapy are not culturally trained, then they can make an assumption about their patient or client's behavior that
Mhm.
again pathologizes that person rather than understanding that they're actually doing something very reasonable to keep themselves and their sweetheart safe.
Yes. Yes, I love that. I love that. And so, um, would you mind giving an example of, for instance, since we were just talking about ICE raids, how might someone working with an immigrant family today, what might a culturally grounded approach look like in working with an individual, family, or community right now? That may not typically be thought of as a typical straight of the road therapeutic practice, but something that could be helpful to these communities.
Well, first I would ask the client, what does safety feel like for you? Have you ever had safety? Has your family or community ever experienced safety? How has your family, what has your community, your culture, your ancestors done when people were hurt? How did your
Mm,
community and culture heal you? So, for example, um, I was doing a suicide safety plan with a veteran who is indigenous, of multiple indigenous communities, and he was experiencing suicidal ideation. And so I
mhm,
did a safety plan, which is research finds that when we do safety plans with patients or clients, that significantly increases their ability to survive a repeated time when their coping strategies are so overwhelmed that the only thought of being able to escape that unbearable pain is suicide. So we know safety plans work. They can work
mhm.
if they are
Right.
written by the patient themselves. Okay, so I'm doing the safety plan. So that's just in general. So I'm doing the safety plan with this indigenous veteran. And one of the things that it asks is like, what are some activities that you can do if you start to feel overwhelmed that will just distract you? It could be like playing a
Mm,
video game, or it could be, taking a walk or whatever it is. And then there's another question that's like, if you are in a moment of overwhelm, where would you like to get help? Okay, so both of
mm,
those questions, I'm asking him on purpose, excuse me, from his indigenous communities for examples. And he starts to
right.
tell me about a if I remember correctly, the term that he used, and I don't know that this is the term in the community that's used, or if he said it to me this way because I'm not a part of his community, but he called it a vision quest. And he
Okay.
talked about this time that he went with an elder, or with a person who was in a healing role. I don't know the correct term from within his community, but there was somebody who was leading him and a group of other people, and they went into an outdoor area for a prolonged period of time, and he sat there. And at a certain point, he had a vision, and he talked about a sentient being. And that's literally the word that he used, sentient being. And it was very powerful for him, and it was very healing for him. And he talked about being on this particular mountain. And so
Mhm.
in his safety plan, I said, well, can we get a picture of that mountain that you were on and put
Uh-huh.
it in the place in your home where you have the repeated thoughts of self-harm? And that, he told me later, was extremely helpful because one, it built on this cultural experience that he had when he felt safest, when he
Huh.
felt connected to his community, and it was something that connected him to the land. And for a number of indigenous people, if not indigenous people all over the world,
Mhm.
land connection to land is extremely important. It is a
Yes.
resource unlike anything else. Nobody ever
Mhm.
talked to me, Cache, in my master's program or my doctoral program about your connection to land, right? Another
Mm.
example would be sweat lodges. Sweats have
Yes.
been done since time immemorial from
Yeah.
indigenous people in what's now considered the United States and Mexico and Canada, so-called US, Mexico, and Canada,
Right.
before any of this was these terms, right? We have
Uh-huh.
always used sweat and bathing, ceremonial bathing to heal ourselves. And so that's another.
Mhm.
And now the research is picking up on it. There is an amazing doctor out at Arizona State University who is studying the impact of sweat lodges, and he is finding
Love
incredible
that.
mental health benefits of being in sweat lodges. So the
Yeah.
fact that it hasn't been studied yet, the fact that Western science and hasn't identified it as a thing, but you know what? Our ancestors for millennia have said that it works. Maybe we should give a little attention to that.
I don't know why it's so difficult for people to go back to things that worked. We like these phrases like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's like there was a lot of things that were broken that were perfectly fine. So maybe if we just go back to that. And it's so interesting that you talk about sweat lodges because that is something that has been coming up for me recently. It is definitely something I know is a part a next one of the next parts of my spiritual journey. I also think that I have just I think I have a natural sweat lodge. Like I'm a sweater, like
Mm,
I'm a sweater and a bather. And like the more that I learn about these things, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like these things have just been sitting inside of me and now so it's a very interesting way in which sometimes even when once we gain access to things, similarly the land, right? I don't think I was taught connection to the land through words, but I have the privilege of having been raised in both the city and the country. I'm, born and raised in Philly, but my grandmother and so much of my family is in the rural South down on the Delmarva Peninsula, and so I spent summers, breaks, sometimes I even lived with my grandmother, and uh, and my grandmother like can make anything grow. She's been growing things. All the trees in her yard, she planted. All the trees that are there right now, she planted. And I can take her anywhere and she can grab a stick or a branch or a root and bring it, and she can make hybrid things. I really think it's I mean, some folks would call it magical. I just call it ancestral. But
mm,
I've had connection to that, like laying on the ground, having to have my hands and feet. I'm known for being barefoot outside all my life. I've been told like, why are you and my feet, Eliana, my feet, just so listeners, my feet are very soft. Okay, so they don't look or feel like I have been barefoot my whole life, but I really have. I cannot stand shoes. Okay, so we're getting off topic, but all of these things I think actually have helped or have contributed to actually my mental health in ways that I didn't know was happening. I believe that these things were naturally carrying me through a
mm,
very traumatic
mm,
childhood, very traumatic educational experiences. Even though school was an escape for me, I was still, I'm from the city, but I'm educated in the burbs, and so I often was one of two, three, four, a handful of faces of color, and usually only black. And so I think that there were ways in which I believe that your ancestors' wisdom sometimes carries you and shows up in your life, and carries you through times when you're not even realizing it. And then as you do your own healing and your own spiritual journey, you find out like, oh my gosh, this is what was happening this whole time. I grew up all my life taking I would take a shower in the morning and a bath at night. And everybody's always like, "Why do you need so much water?" I'm like, "I don't know. I literally feel it. It's a energizer. I don't know. I could stay in
mm.
the ocean all day, just all these things." So I thank you for listing those things because I think it's really important. And I've always had white therapists, um, not because I couldn't have BIPOC therapist, but I think I have some interest in that's another subject for another day. But and but the white therapists that I have had have always been able to ask me about ancestral wisdom about even like what is happening right now in this session with your ancestors. And I just think that it's important for mental health professionals to, like you said, ask the questions of what things are living inside of and with your clients, and make sure that you are also tapping into those things, right? And not just your learnings from your education. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
uh,
Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing that about having your feet and your hands in the dirt and also like just feeling the earth. I mean, you didn't say dirt specifically, it could have been grass, I don't know. But like connecting to the planet.
yes.
And what you make me think about is like the reason why I brought up that the sweat lodge with this man and his safety plan. So our brains cannot distinguish between something that's happening now and something that happened before. So
Mm,
when we can think about and really get in as much detail as possible, what did it smell like? What did it sound like? What
mhm.
did it taste like? What did it feel like on our skin? Um, all our five senses at a moment when we felt safer, when we felt respected, when we felt happy or what have you, we can tap into that moment, that memory anytime. And if we
Right.
really spend time going into those details, the brain will start to release those feel good hormones. Cache, the same feel good hormones that are activated when we take an antidepressant. We have a pharmacy in our brains, right? SSRIs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors.
Right, right.
Serotonin is one of those feel good hormones that we get when we remember that. So, with this man and the safety plan, and when I found
Mhm.
out that he had done sweat lodges and found them to be very healing, because not all of us will have a positive
Right.
memory with something that's cultural, right? Because sometimes our own people are the ones who do bad things to us.
Yes.
So, but for this man, it was a good memory. So, what we wrote into his safety plan was a meditation where he would think about what did it sound like when the water hit the grandfather rocks? What did it feel like on his
Mm,
skin when he would exit the sweat lodge and into the night sky? What did it smell like when the cedar was thrown on the grandfather rocks during, what did it sound like with the different rounds of prayers that were happening? That was medicine that came from literally his brain and his people. It had nothing to do with anything I had ever been trained in.
right.
Really, what it was just like you're saying, asking him, when did you feel better than now? And how can we build that memory and letting him know that the power is always within him? He doesn't actually, because sometimes I think we can over rely on therapists or pharmacology, and that can be a danger for us too.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. This is a great transition into the healing part of the conversation. As we're talking about this, I want to just say I'm going to start with just another few notes. And you've already started us in this conversation where you talked about what workplaces can look like. So workplaces that acknowledge socio-political stressors and allow flexible time for grieving or processing actually report higher employee retention and morale. So as you were saying, when folks feel like they have time, space, and opportunity to process, to be who they are, to be where they are, they actually don't mind staying. Imagine that. you know? Trauma informed leadership and peer support networks reduce employee turnover by up to 25%, and that's in high stress environments. So I can't even imagine what it would be for like, whatever that whatever regular stress environments is. And then also culturally responsive mental health interventions. This is from the American Psychological Association just in 2023, folks. Culturally responsive mental health interventions are 2 to 3 times more effective in long-term outcomes for marginalized groups than Western methods. I need to say that again because I think people sometimes think that this is something that marginalized people just say, We just want to be different. We just want to be special. We want special treatment. These are some of the things that people say. But I think we need to, this is a study done by multiple studies done by the American Psychological Association that have determined that culturally responsive mental health interventions are 2 to 3 times more effective for long-term outcomes for marginalized groups. So if you are out there and you're a mental health professional and you've even been remotely doubting that you should dive into cultural responsiveness a bit more, that should be a pusher. So I will ask you, do you know of, besides Costco, because now everybody loves Costco, one example of how a workplace or professional space has gotten it right in terms of supporting mental health amid external stress or among stressors?
Well, I'll go back to the year that the Pulse nightclub massacre happened at
Mm,
88 Palo Alto. Uh, the I don't know, director, I guess, and I did an event that was a memorial and specifically talking about the experiences of LGBT service members and veterans, because there was a man at the nightclub that night. And for folks who aren't familiar, this was in Orlando, Florida. It was a shooter showed up at a gay nightclub that was predominantly Black and Latino, predominantly gay, and many, many lives were lost that night. And the bouncer is a Marine Corps veteran.
yeah.
And when the shooting started, he and 70 people went into this back room, and people were freaking out, of course. And he knew, because he knew the layout, because he worked there, that there was a door that exited the building. And he's screaming, open the door, open the door. But there was so much panic. And so he somehow
Mm,
got himself across the room, opened the door. The 70 people got out. And apparently, right after they got out, the gunman entered that room. So that
mm,
man saved 70 people's lives that night. And so the event that we did was to, one, honor when U.S. veterans come home. Part of their training is they have an ability to be
mm,
laser focused on getting as many people out of danger as possible. So it was a way for us to honor and affirm what this veteran had done for civilian society in that moment. But it was
mm,
also a way for us to bring our LGBTQ veterans and staff together to mourn, because we had to mourn what had just happened to our community. And we built a huge, it's an altar, frankly, and it was around, the ways that we build Dia de los Muertos altars. And so I think that it was so effective, in part also because we asked everyone to stand in the audience who was heterosexual and cisgender. And then we had people look around. Oh, I get a little emotional thinking about this, because I think for
mm,
so many of us who are queer, when things that are homophobic, transphobic, biphobic happen, we may not know that there are allies around us because it's not obvious. We may not know that there are people who will get our backs. And
yeah.
so it was a moment where we were able to create a greater sense of safety among the LGBT veterans and staff by saying, let's acknowledge that these heterosexual cisgender people are here. Now, frankly, I think everybody who is heterosexual and cisgender should have been there, right? So I'm
Right,
not
right.
saying that, I'm not trying to valorize these people, but it is
Yeah,
also
yeah.
important for us as queer folks to know that sometimes there are people who are so moved by the sense of needing for justice and acknowledging the injury to our community that they will show up for us. So I
Yeah.
think, the VA allowed that, and it was a really powerful experience.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That sounds like a powerful experience. And, when you just spoke about acknowledging allies, I think about even just the statistics with LGBTQ plus youth, right? That having just one affirming adult can really make a difference. And so when I think about what you just said, that's what I think about is just knowing that you have one person standing next to you can make all the difference. So when you're in a room full of people, and you have multiple people stand up in allyship, I can't imagine the difference that that probably made to a lot of people in that space. So thank you for bringing that to light. So I wanna ask then, what do you, Eliana, people, especially folks in leadership and mental health roles, what do you want them to take from everything that we've talked about today? And even some things that maybe we haven't, but just this concept of workplace trauma and abuse, that healing is possible, that Western ways aren't always the best way, all of the things that we've talked about, the healing nature, what workplaces can do, all of that. What do you want folks to, and like I said, especially folks that are in mental health roles or in, workplace leadership roles, what do you want these folks to take away?
That's a great question. I think that comment you just made, that healing is possible. It's healing is possible for all of us. Our brains,
Mm,
our nervous systems, our bodies are designed to heal. We are designed to heal. We can always grow new neural pathways in the brain. We can develop practices that help to regulate our nervous system so that we have more control over how the level of distress that we feel when really horrible bad things are happening around us.
mm,
It's not to make us numb. It's not to make us smile when we should be crying or singing when we should be, complaining. Like, it's not toxic positivity. That's not what I'm suggesting here at all. What I'm suggesting is that our leadership is everything. We cannot have psychological safety in the workplace if our leaders are not willing to acknowledge where they have limited information, to recognize when they make mistakes, and to make it
mm,
safe for all of the rest of us to make mistakes and to share half-baked ideas, right? We know that the brain shuts down when we feel scared that we are about to be critiqued, when we are about to be judged, when we are about to be shut down in the workplace. We
mhm,
cannot come up with the kinds of creativity workarounds that all workplaces require. Um, so I would say that I think the best thing that leaders can do in any workplace, and certainly that mental health providers can do, is to learn about nervous system regulation and to create the opportunity for our employees and for our clients. We cannot just focus on things like medications. We can't even rely on evidence-based practices in and of themselves.
right.
If we cannot get the nervous system to feel safer in the moment, the brain will not work. And it doesn't matter if it's trying to work to
Mm,
get a job task done or to recover from a trauma. In
mhm,
both cases, the brain is not going to function at the highest capacity. So I would say that in order to create psychological safety in the workplace, it's really important to help our employees not just have this space where we can process a little bit about the horrors that are happening around us so we can get our job done, but really create programs beyond employee assistance programs even, but create practices in the day-to-day workplace environment that helps people's nervous systems to regulate so that we can show up and be our best selves. And I think for
mm,
therapists, most of us were never trained in somatic practices, and we really need that. And so I don't care if you are a therapist who works with people who are living with depression or anxiety or bipolar or
mhm,
whatever it might be, we have to start, I think, with the nervous system.
mm. Yes, thank you so much. That answer, every space I'm in, people are like, where do we start? Where do we start? And I'm like, yourself. And I think that that's kind of what you're saying, right? It's like you have to start with something else. It's not just this. And you talked about this earlier because when you said, it's the same as going to the doctor and they give you antacids for a stomach problem instead of really figuring, and we could speak to that too, because I think in some ways it's the way our entire systems work, right? Like they treat the symptoms and not the root cause. And oftentimes it's because we're scared of treating the root cause. And what I hear you saying is, therapist, you got to really be willing to treat the root cause and not just continue treating the symptoms so this person is coming back to you. Like you said, the goal is to therapize your client out of therapy, right? not not to have them codependent on the therapy. So I appreciate that. Um, all right. This has been a very, very interesting conversation. And now I have some rapid fire questions for you
Okay, I'm ready.
that can that
Okay.
continue it a little bit, but these are rapid fire, so short answers, okay? Don't feel pressed to just whatever comes to mind first, all right? This is a quick reflection round. We like unfiltered answers, speak from the heart, okay? First
Okay.
one is one word to describe your mental health right now.
Crispy.
Ooh, love it. A quote or mantra that you return to.
No feeling is final, but the final feeling.
Mm, I love that. One word to describe your relationship. I'm sorry, one word to describe your health overall right now. What is a practice that is saving you right now?
Loving my family.
I
Loving and
love
being
that.
loved by my family. Yeah, loving
Yes.
and being loved.
And can we have snaps for love as a practice? Okay. I think folks
Yeah.
forget that sometimes. It really is. It's a practice. All right. Last rapid fire question is, what does liberation feel like to you?
Liberation feels like being able to tap into moment of peace internally, even when everything around me is on fire. And I want to just say, can I say one more sentence about that?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Please.
Because I think sometimes people will listen to folks like you and me talk about this stuff. We've been activists, we've been scholars, we've been social workers and therapists for years and years and years. So they might think like, oh,
Right.
well, they sound like they've all got it, and I can't be that. And I freeze when somebody is being a jerk at work, or I freeze when ICE shows up, and I can't be the person who stands up and takes
Yeah.
action. And I just want to say, be gentle with ourselves. That's a
Yes.
nervous system experience of collapse. There's nothing wrong with who you are. Don't beat yourself up for it afterwards, especially like if you're a white person and you're like, I do not agree that racism is okay, but whenever they treat my Black woman colleague badly at work, I can't find the words. I want to say, first and foremost, do not beat yourself up for that. Do nervous system training. Go to
Yes.
places like Black Octopus Society, Dr. Resma Menakem's work, because he is training us how to temper our nervous systems. It's just like going to the gym. We got to work the muscles in order for them to
Right.
work for us in the moment. So, the ability to feel a sense of internal peace when the world around me is on fire, I'm learning that because of Dr. Resma Menakem's work.
Mm.
And he does this work in spaces with people who are in Black bodies, people who are in bodies of culture, and people who are in white bodies. And that's the language that he uses. We are
Yeah.
practicing how to talk about racism, how to heal racial trauma inside of ourselves first and foremost. So Black Octopus Society, I get no royalties from talking this stuff up. It's just, I know that it works. I know that
Yeah.
it works.
No, you know how I am. I'm like, put it out there. If it's a good resource, please put it out there. So Black Octopus Society, check it out. Um, and so the last question that we like to, this is not a rapid fire question, it's a regular question that we at Liberation Sessions like to ask all our guests to end with, and you will appreciate it because it is the social worker's question. If you woke up tomorrow and the state of mental health and justice were exactly as you, Dr. Heliana Ramirez, has envisioned or dreamed of, what would it look like?
Huh. It would look like everyone knowing that they are exactly who they're supposed to be, and they are so
Mm,
loved. They are so loved by whether it is a higher power, a universe, a god, a goddess, whomever. Each one of us is so precious and so loved. And anyone who has treated us otherwise, that's their trauma and that's their
mm,
problem.
yes,
But we will know that those negative messages about us, the bad things that were done to us, that was not us. And we are not our trauma. We
yes.
are what it has survived and can flourish beyond.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much. This has been a rich and powerful conversation. I will have to do another one because I know we have so many more things we could talk about. Eliana, thank you for always showing up, for showing my listeners what it means to love boldly, fight tenderly. For our listeners, I want you to think about how has workplace trauma shaped your relationship to safety, to your community, to yourself? And what would it mean for you to begin reclaiming that? As you listen to Dr. Ramirez and I speak today, I just want you to think about what does that healing look like for you? What does that acknowledgement look like for you? Um, I want to ask Dr. Ramirez, do you have any last words, resources? How can folks follow you? You have anything coming up, events, speaking events, anything you got in the pipeline?
Gosh, you're such a precious community member. I am so grateful to you. Thank you. Thank you. Really, truly, thank you for this conversation and the invitation. So, for people who are living in Ohio or British Columbia, I am taking clients. If people would like therapy, they can find me at Psychology Today. I have a page there. If people are looking for coaching and they don't live in Ohio or British Columbia, I work one-on-one with people, and I do groups on Wednesday nights. I do a life after layoff group for people who've experienced layoffs. I've also done groups for DEI backlash survivors. And connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can go to my website, which is workplacetraumarecovery.com. And I have a book that's coming out soon and an app that I've created to help people defend themselves in the workplace.
Nice.
So, yeah, please do connect. And I welcome connections, especially on LinkedIn and anywhere else. So, thank you so much.
Absolutely. I'm so excited about this app. I have to see this app. I want to thank you again so much for being not only a wonderful colleague, but an incredible friend. I am so grateful for the work that you do and the work that you put out into the world. I thank you for the way that you do community and the ways in which you show up for all of your communities. And I just thank you for being, a loud sibling along with me, because some of us we have to find each other sometimes. So I want to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in, our viewers for watching the liberation sessions, a fresh take on mental health, healing, and justice. Don't forget to stay tuned, subscribe when available, which we should be soon. Share this episode and more with someone that you love and that you think would benefit from it. And keep showing up for mental health and justice in all of the ways that you can. So until next time, stay rooted, stay radical, and stay in love. Thank you.